Okay, we're live. We will call to order this special meeting of the Easton Reading Region 9 Joint Policy Committee at 7:33 p.m. On April 18th, 2022. Members in attendance, John Stinson and Chris Parkin.
I will call to order the special meeting of the Region 9 Policy Committee at 7:33 p.m. Members in attendance are Sarah Lieberger, Kathy Thompson, and Cheryl Graziano.
All right, our first item on the agenda is the approval of minutes for the April, is that right? It should be the April, oh, it says April 1st and April 8th. So we definitely have the April 8th meeting to approve. I'm not sure about the April 1st.
The first was prior to spring break and the minutes hadn't been posted.
Oh, I see. Okay. All right. Very good. Then we'll look for the approval of the April 1st and the April 8th. Do I have a...
So moved.
Thank you. Absent objection, we'll consider them approved by the Joint Policy Committee. And does someone on the Region 9 Committee want to move?
No objection on our end? Okay, so moved.
Okay. Very good. That takes us to public comment. No members of the public being present. We'll move to committee member comment. Okay, hearing none, we'll go to discussion and possible action. Our first item there is administrative updates. I think we'll reserve the prerogative to jump back to this if we have members of the administration join us, which will take us to the model policy review process. A quick recap for our viewers at home. The reason we're having a meeting tonight out of our regular cadence of Friday mornings is to try to wrap up the discussion. We have 2 hours scheduled. The idea is that we are able to go through the comments on as many of these as possible. We've been working our way through the 3,000, 4,000 series, etc. And during our break for spring break, we resolved to try to get through the remaining policies and be ready to discuss. I think we're going to make best effort tonight and see how far we can get. And I hope that will be pretty far. Any questions, comments, or discussion on the process? Question?
Is someone from Shipman and Goodwin still confirmed to come to our meeting on Friday the 22nd?
I believe that's the plan. I think the regular person wasn't able to attend, but Dr. McKinnon had arranged for someone else to attend.
And that's still scheduled as planned.
I believe so. And I think what our plan was to meet from 8 to 10 instead of just 9 to 10. And that first hour, we'd have the opportunity to finalize any discussion about the major items that we want to run through with the shipment attorney. And I think in advance of that, Sarah and I were going to try to prepare a sort of a draft document that would expedite the discussion on the 22nd. Good. Okay. All right, then I think we would I think we're ready to move on to our next item, which is the policy series review and discussion. So let me start with I was able to get through a lot of these today. I was on early this morning and then sort of wrapped my day around 5 o'clock and got through a bunch of them and during lunch and whatnot. I didn't find it to be, too much of a push, but I know people have a lot that they're dealing with. So are we prepared to go through sort of each one of the items, or should we be looking to stop at a certain number? I see that mostly everyone got through line 59, row 59. And then there's, sort of one gap for row 60, and then we have 60 and 61 and 62 we all got through. Is it, I guess what I'm asking first is the reviewed date, is that accurate? Is that up to date for everyone? Yeah, okay. And do we agree that if we haven't all had a chance to look at one, that we would say we want to sort of postpone the sort of our look at it today, or do we want to say we'll continue and move forward?
I think it'll depend, because I think I didn't get through everything, but I can look at just a couple of these towards the end that I don't expect there being a whole lot to think about. Right. And if it's one page, I'm happy to read promotion and retention on the fly in one page and not have an issue with it. So
yeah, right.
I would agree with Chris. We could, and there are enough of us that have commented on it. That I kind of skipped around just to catch up, get to the longer ones. But I think there's enough of us that have read it, all of them. Yeah. So if we need to go through and discuss that I'm fine doing that as well.
Yeah, okay. I'm more concerned about just making as much progress as we can, because we're asking a lot of ourselves in the next 110 minutes.
Yep. Great. Okay. All right. Very good. Then I will share my screen and we'll jump in. I believe we left off here, administration of medications. Hold on.
I thought we had a green highlight on.
Right. Yep, you're right. No, yeah, it's right there. So we left off right there, and I think we're ready to move. Does anyone remember whether or not we actually reviewed that policy, or was that marking the last one I'm just going to open it up and double check. Yep. Okay. So we definitely got to this because we have responses to comments, which we only do inside of these sessions. So we did that. All right. Good. All right. So we'll go to social media.
I would not adopt this at all.
Yeah, I think at a minimum we flagged this.
There's no reason to do this.
To adopt this policy. The statutes don't actually require us to do this.
The statutes are not going to require a social media policy. I'm fairly confident the statutory references refer to, refraining from creating a hostile work environment, refraining from breaching obligations, refraining from violating law, which are going to be policies in and of themselves.
Yeah. So do we want to flag this for Shipman just to say we don't believe we need to adopt this?
Yeah, I mean, we could ask we could ask the question, show me cause why we should adopt this, basically.
Right. I agree.
Everyone in agreement with that? That we'll tag this one as flagging and likely reject, and we'll look for Shipman to give us a good reason. Good. Okay. Sudden cardiac arrest awareness. Looks like we've just tagged this for EDD and no other comments. Good. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Seems perfectly perfunctory.
Yep. EDD being enumerated duties document for first-time viewers. Administration of medications. Chris does not like how long it is. Yeah, and there's a bit of inconsistency that we'll see later on too.
Yeah, I wondered reading this if I'm like, this is really what happens in every building. I don't know.
Kathy, you flagged programs run by the district or held in school buildings and administered by others.
Yes.
Yeah, because it's before and after school programs that you listed here too. Yeah.
Right, and for example, the ECC potentially runs programs in some of the school buildings, but they're not a school. They're not the district.
Right. So
that is just a clarification.
And I think it's so above where it says before or after school programs, any child care program operated and administered by a local or regional board of education. So I think this just means the held in school buildings and administered by local or regional boards.
Well, director only means the person responsible for the operation of those other programs which are so defined. It does not include the director of an extracurricular program, because an extracurricular program is specifically not an after-school program, even if it meets after school. So when director is used in this policy, it would not be assigning a duty, obligation, or responsibility to the director of an after-school club. It would only be assigning that obligation to the director of something that is a defined as before or after school program. One of the problems with using sort of common words like director in a policy like this with so many definitions is that you're constantly going back and forth to try to figure out what a sentence means, because it's using 6 normal words in order that all have very specific meaning.
Yeah. So, Kathy, does that first, is that more clear to you now? I don't know that I'm necessarily more clear on it.
I mean, it is more clear in the sense that it refers specifically to those programs. However, if you go back up to the before or after school program, are those other where it says such programs do not include public or private entities licensed, etc. Are those been programs subject to the same policy?
I would not think so. But what you need to do is look within the policy for where that defined term is used. And one of the issues that we have in this policy is further down on page 10, it uses the term director, and it refers to a director of a school readiness program or before or after school program, when they've already defined director to mean the person who runs the before or after school program. And now they're using the definition in line in the sentence in a way that's confusing. And then they use the term director in conjunction with program and say program director, which from a legal perspective, I would take to mean intentionally different from just using director. And then it says properly trained directors in another place. Well, what makes the director properly trained? This is so long that they've lost sight of consistency in language. And that's one of the problems I have with it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I forgot even making a comment here back on April 1st, but it's about the same issue about, does the language match? And it doesn't match within this one document. Chances that the language matches across the policies is
right. And that's my chief concern about the Shipman policies in general, is that there are definitions within policies that are not necessarily consistent across policies based on different drafters, different times, and sort of a failure to be internally consistent.
I think it's fair to say that the CABE policies suffered from the same ailment, and probably much worse so.
Right. It is a chore to make sure that this is all on the same page. And frankly, a policy book should probably have a common glossary of terms that all refer back to it, instead of having to dig for definitions within policies. But
it's something that I've been thinking about. One of the comments later is about, sort of how we're going to organize all this, sort of content, how we're going to publish this. And one of the thoughts that I had is, if you put all of these policies into a single document and had a table of contents that allowed you to easily navigate between it, then you would also be able to do a keyword search. And thinking of it as a parent, I don't necessarily know which document has the sort of operative policy for homework or the operative policy for whatever the case might be. But if I can keyword search across one document, well, that's great. So
that would be incredible.
Yeah.
Except that will only work if the use of the definition is consistent through every single policy, which is an onerous task.
Yeah, it is, and I would argue not our job to do. I think what I would propose, and I don't know that this will have any legs. I think everyone will be behind it on our side, but we should refer this to Shipman to say, hey, here is a problem policy that helps to illuminate a larger problem across the policies. And I'm happy to tell them, I think you guys have done a great job with the policy compared to our other options, but it could be better, and here's how.
Right. Here's the pain points that we're seeing, because you don't look at them beginning to end like we've spent the past 2 months looking at the beginning to end. And so everything is fresh in our mind about how inconsistent they are.
Right.
Now, but at the same time, I don't want perfect to be the enemy of good here.
Yeah.
And I think that this policy in particular sort of falls into that. There are warts all over this behemoth, but I think adopting it for the sake of being done with it has substantial merits, because we need to do something about administration medication. And this is the sort of thing that's vetted. The other comments down below, I think on page 4, there's a question about what a principal means, because the administrator in the school is a really lousy definition. I don't know if we want to make any changes to that before we adopt it, because that's just bad.
Yeah. What I could imagine, I mean, we do intend to have some preface to this to help, sort of with sort of pronouns across and with titles across, and maybe we're able to.
What definition would fix this? There are at least 2 and sometimes as many as 5 administrators in the school.
When ambiguity is used in these policies.
Call John?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, a principal means the administrator in the school. No, it doesn't.
Yeah, the drafter did not go to the school.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's 2 things here. One is these policies were probably meant to stand alone in some way and not be a cohesive book.
Yeah.
And I think in our minds, we're looking at it as a book and expecting everything to fit together and work and flow together, which was not how I don't think they were written. So we're asking these policies to work cohesively together. And that's a big ask.
I'm just asking for principle to mean principle in all the policies these people draft. And I don't think that's as huge an ask as
I think it's
other things.
Yeah, I think there's a spectrum of the ask, right? There's this definition is bad and they should fix it. It just is a bad definition. But I think the larger ask is, do you aspire for this to be a cohesive book? If so, here's how you can make that.
Right. Because there will be times when you have a policy that says that for the purpose of this policy only, after school program excludes the robotics club. Here's what the after school activities mean, because the robotics club has some special regulation that goes to it. But generally speaking, we shouldn't be looking. There are a handful of policies that all try to define the same term. And I'm very concerned about making tweaks to definitions in one place or having inconsistencies in definitions that create for weird results.
Right.
I mean, right. The way it stands, I don't think we could have a preface with definitions unless we are going through, or Shipman goes through every single policy to ensure consistency. I don't think the way it stands now, we could do that and be sure it's going to mean what it's meant to mean across every policy that we adopt.
I think in a very narrow way, I think we can, where we're not saying all terms that could appear here, like physician or podiatrist, but in very sort of specific ways that impact us. Sort of head of school versus principal. I think in those ways, and I think we have a fairly narrow set of those that we could offer.
It's half a page of definitions that are specific to our sort of unique circumstance. But I think what John's saying is that to the extent that there's a glossary of terms, a policy 001 glossary, that will be an ask back to the drafters of the policies and not a task that we'd be trying to undertake.
For the future, if they're eager to do it right now, wonderful, but I doubt it. And I think for the future, and when we get into our quarterly cadence. Yeah.
Yes, I think it should be Shipman who does that.
Yeah. Okay, so then it sounds like we're willing to hold our nose on much of this, but we still need to flag the principal definition. Is there anything else in here? I just want to make sure we're not missing anything. CEDD. Yeah, and there's actually, I'm going to leave it. there's a better way to navigate when you're going to talk about substance A, substance B, substance C, than to have it buried inside of paragraph form, but leaving it.
This the hold your nose expression is right with this one.
Yeah. Oh, hold on. I saw something other than ED. Include. So we have an optional insert here. Kathy, did you have any sort of specific thoughts about this one?
Oops, sorry. I mean, my medical opinion would be that we would include this option to make this available. It's just, but it's a question, do we include this? And I don't believe we have a medical advisor.
We do.
We do?
do.
Okay. So
do we want to refer this to our medical advisor?
It's just highlighted below.
Then are we making the recommendation to include the optional text? Do we all agree to that? I favor it.
I would agree. Yeah.
I would include it.
Yeah.
I don't see an obvious downside.
Right.
I don't see a major budgetary implication or liability implication.
Right. Okay.
There's an EDD about procedures being distributed, but that's just one of 1,000.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of ADD in this doc. We do not.
Oh, Chris answered my question. I didn't know if in any case did we employ our own bus drivers for even if we're to the kids who are going to Trumbull Agra to anybody in any case, do we employ?
They don't work for ER9. They're contracted out one way or the other.
Okay.
And she's not on my committee, John, so I'm not causing any problems.
Okay. True, but dicey. All right. School nurse review. Yeah, I like that. So we would refer this to the school nurse, and frankly, I think the whole policy, it would be good to get some feedback on from healthcare professionals who are working within.
This concept of reviewing it at least biennially is interesting, and it pegs the question of how you sort of schedule and calendar that.
Yeah, and I think it's an extension of our EDD work that is, even when it's not specifically calling out for somebody to do something, that it just says something needs to get done in some cases. And it's like, okay, well, then
it's almost like you say that this is a policy that gets reviewed, the fall of every election year or something, or, at the same time you do the healthy food stuff, but every other year, or you just do it every year. It's at least biennially. You could just say you're doing it every spring.
Right. And I think we're NB.
Oh, just note. Well, no. Just note. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, good.
That was just a note.
Yep. Okay, and I think we're done with this. It does have at least a little bit of we need to flag it. Good. Attendance, truancy. I was waiting for comments to load in.
This is all regulation, correct? I believe.
I'll scroll back up in a second to look.
It's 2 paragraphs of policy.
Yeah. Cheryl, the updated post-COVID?
Yeah, I wasn't sure how timely this was, and just, making presumptions about there were mental health references and mental health data. So I'm assuming it's as updated. Looks like it's 2021, but I'm not sure if.
I mean, it's referring to laws passed as recently as last June.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, to clear. All right, and yes, you're right, Kathy. Here's the policy, and the rest becomes all reg. Okay. Moving on. Bullying and safe school climate.
Is a pass, I think.
I think I agree. It's something that we've talked about very recently.
Yep.
Good. Okay. I'm just going to start doing one of these when we've looked at it together. Okay. Agreed. Can I close out the
that's
odd choice of words? Thank you. Medication. Yeah. Typo.
This is just a question. This is specifically for athletes versus there's a policy that's very similar for students. Is there a reason? Is it that there is an athlete specific policy? Is it around like performance enhancing types of things specifically? Because this seemed very similar to the other policy for students.
Yeah, and it's odd to me that it also touches on alcohol use when the other policy touches on alcohol use.
Yeah, I thought the same thing, Kathy, about the performance enhancing as well. But I'm just not sure that there's a need for a separate, distinct policy, right?
Yeah, why wouldn't we combine the two? If there's anything that's different and meaningful, why wouldn't we have a single policy? Why would there be a separate policy if you happen to be an athlete? Is that what's happening here?
There are different references or regulations, perhaps.
This one specifically includes CIAC rules for whatever reason, but
and
right.
It does reference coaches and athletic staff specifically, but I just wondered why there would be a policy that applies only to athletes but not to the entire student body.
I mean, hopefully Shipman can answer this quickly,
Yeah, that's good. So we'll flag this one, and we'll leave the note there on Power School. Good. Abuse reporting.
And just as a general comment, this is a Series 5000 under the students policy, this chemical health policy for student athletes. But then its prohibition does not seem to be limited to student athletes, which might be one of the ways in which it's a little bit broader / distinct from a student specific policy. In accordance with participation rules, the board prohibits the use, sale, distribution, or possession of controlled drugs, controlled substances, drug paraphernalia, performance enhancing substances, or alcohol during any school sponsored athletic event, whether on or off property. So that would apply to adults who are present also. So it's not limited.
Okay. We think we still ask the question.
Yeah, I think you still ask the question. I'm just trying to ponder the distinction.
Yeah. Okay. All right. For abuse reporting, all right. Policy number. This is one of those I think we've talked about this in the past where it refers to another policy.
And it gets the caption wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yes. Okay. Yep. On the cross, and there's cross reference problems here. ADD, fine.
And I don't love all of the hyperlinks and phone numbers and things in here, just because phone numbers and websites have a tendency to come and go, and having to redo policy on a regular basis because of that seems problematic.
Absurd. Yeah, I think we, at a minimum, we have more control over our own resources, and if we're going to link, we could link back to our own website, which then could house all of the contact information.
Right. Resources, including on the national, state, and local level, are found at er9.org/suicide prevention or whatever it is.
Right. And we could actually leave the content here, but then add for, to ensure, to see the up-to-date listing of this, you can go here.
Right. Basically disclaim the fact that it might be changing without having to go back and change it every time.
Right. Exactly.
I like that. So how do we note this for Sarah Scrofani, though?
I think we put it here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, like the Center for Family Justice is great, but maybe there's more that we could list, and so she has a page built out for us. Yeah.
And there will be community-based groups. You might want to link from that too. Yeah. This is a statewide template. This is not an Easton, Reading focused, Fairfield County even focused thing. So.
And this thought could apply to many of the other policies that also list resources. There are many of them.
Yeah.
I think this approach is a good one.
I think the ones that list places like the EEOC and the Commission on Human Rights are less problematic because those are government agencies that aren't going anywhere. But when it comes to nonprofits and units of universities, they could change tomorrow for better or worse.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Good. Drug and alcohol use by students.
What?
It seems when you find one or two of those, they're throughout. Right. It starts to go into professional employee and vagueness. I mean, is this a hold our nose, or is this, do we have a policy that we're happy with now that would allow us to reject this and refer shipment to revise?
There's just a lot of questions here.
Yeah.
There are a lot of questions.
Yeah. I think at a minimum, we're referring this to Shipman so that they can review it and give a honest assessment of whether or not they think this is their best effort, or if they think they could do better on this. And I suspect we have a policy that will suffice here if we end up deciding to reject.
So what's interesting is our current policy on alcohol, drugs, and tobacco, parentheses, including performance enhancing drugs, is 5131.6, at least in Reading. And it seems to be a little bit of a combination of those two policies we just talked about. There's a whole thing about CIAC imposing additional sanctions on athletes and disciplinary action generally, drug-free awareness programs, inhalant abuse, but it's also going to be out of date because it talks about medical marijuana pursuant to Public Act 12-55, which is 10 years old now.
Yeah.
This policy was last discussed in Reading in 2016.
Okay.
But seems to a certain extent to be, it exists. And so if we didn't want to adopt this mess at this point, we're not leaving a void.
Right. Okay. So we'll flag it and try to come to a resolution on that one and get advice there.
Yeah, because there's also language in there. If a student comes to a school staff and says they have an issue, the staff has no obligation. It seems like it's at their discretion to refer the student or to. It seemed unclear to me, that whole situation. They had to turn in evidence, but they could not or should not report the student's name, or they had discretion there. It seemed potentially confusing.
It was weird, and it depended whether they were reporting on themselves or somebody else. Like if I'm coming to a professional employee confidentially to say that Bobby has drugs at school, it's treated differently than if I say I have a drug problem. And it depends. It's differently if you talk to a certified staff member versus a cafeteria worker. Like it's a bizarre construct.
It seemed very confusing potentially to me.
And I can allow for the idea that there might be some complex rules around all of that based on who they're talking to and who they're talking about and all of that, but it should at least be clear, right? Okay, so I think we'll leave this one and move on to educational stability procedures.
John just summarized being a lawyer in one sentence. It should just be clear.
It's complexity I can handle. A lack of clarity, not okay.
I like Cheryl's comment on this educational stability procedures for transportation coordination with TCF. There's a lot of places where they have the bracket public schools. I'd be happy to make it all the district and just take care of that in the preface.
Yeah.
Well, I had a question about this. Is this a policy or is it a procedure? Because it's on school district letterhead and it says educational stability procedures. Is that even a policy or is it more like a regulation?
I had the same question on something later down the list about, and it was specifically not called a policy, not called a regulation. I don't think it was a procedure either. It was some other construct. And so the question I have is, like, if the law requires that the district have a procedure published on district letterhead, or if the law requires that a program management plan exist, well, is that still, for our purposes, still really policy? If it requires that the boards of education sort of define that and have it sort of kept in some kind of centrally located document, which we could call our policy manual.
I think what's a tell here is that it doesn't say Series 5000 or Series anything on it.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Like in the top, the other ones have said Series 5000. Everything we've talked about.
Yeah, but this is where the question pops up, and on so many of these, if we got to go chase down and then interpret the legal references, and that's not the situation that we should be in, especially when we're getting these from our attorneys. So see you copying it.
Who, me?
Yeah. So I think we flag this one, and this one goes in the bucket of, do we really need it?
Mhm.
But I think as it stands, we don't find anything objectionable in it. It's just a question of, do we really need it? Yes.
As a policy.
Right.
Yeah,
So-
because this is really about DCF has the kid. How do we transport the kid?
Mhm.
And how do we coordinate with that? Because I'm pretty sure, if I recall correctly, DCF has a payment obligation too.
Mm.
And so really this is just a logistical, and timing thing, and how we're going to coordinate with DCF.
Mm.
I would be happy to put this on the list of asks, do we need this as a policy?
Yep. Right. Yeah, and I think all these ones that we're tagging, I think as Sarah and I go through, just sort of go through each one of the ones that we've tagged, there'll be a bunch that we throw into the bucket of, we would be okay with this, but do we really need it? And, if there's 5 of those, we should be able to, just get through those, quickly and then move on to the more complex topics. Field trips. Yeah, and agreed, Cheryl. Is it okay if I clear this here? Or you know what? Actually, we leave it, because we're going to come back and clean this up anyways if we end up not using that throughout, or so it's fine. How do we define this? Include competitions that may be multi-day.
I question the utility of this entire thing. I mean, like, do we need a policy? I mean, I'm making a presumption, and maybe it's a bad one, that each school will have its practice and process and manual as far as what's required for field trips. I mean, is there and this policy doesn't really say much. So
Right. It is not pursuant to any legal obligation. It is basically restricting schools into what they can do and requiring additional bureaucratic approvals to do things, which is sort of the board's prerogative. But
Yeah, I would love to hear from Dr. McKinnon what he thinks about needing this.
Does he need this?
Yeah.
Right. And it's not as though there's anything in here about parental consent. I was expecting to find that in here.
right, permission slips and
Right.
notice about conditions and things.
Right. So
Evidently, as long as the superintendent approves it, your children can go on overnight field trips.
Well, the
right.
board needs to approve an
Totally.
overnight field trip too.
Right.
That's where I had a little bit of a concern about every time a kid associated with a group or an extracurricular or who knows is going to go, because we don't define field trip. So does it include when, the XYZ team goes to Providence for 2 days and, we got to go to the board first. Oh, we were invited to a playoff game. It's in such and such. The board needs to hold a special meeting to approve the trip.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that actually happens for 2 of the trips at Barlow. I think the music, and this is pre-COVID. I think it was the music trip to Disney. and then the either mostly Canada trip for the French class. But again, it's parental permission is typically required for that. I would trust the administrators to handle that and obtain the necessary permission, and parents can certainly have the objection if they don't want their kids to go. I don't know what the board necessarily needs to approve, how it's funded, or even approve the trip.
Yeah, it seems like they're asking the wrong people for approvals on these things. If it requires a sort of allocation of funds, which it alludes to here, right? Solicitation of funds. Right. If it requires the board to give money for this, that it wasn't previously budgeted, okay, I could see the board having a role to play, but it just seems odd that parental, like permission slips aren't mentioned in here at all. Even if all we do is we say there will be a regulation somewhere that governs that process.
Just the public solicitation of funds refers to having kids raise money for the trip themselves by selling stuff. This is one of the next policies talks about that.
Is that true? Yeah, right. and that policy was about nutrition.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Candy bars.
I don't see, unless Shipman has a reason why this is of value to us, I don't see why we would need to add this to our policy list.
Yeah. So do we agree we're going to flag this with the thought to reject?
If it is of use, current board policy 6153 pertains to field trips.
Uh-huh.
So we would be deciding to not have a field trip anymore, a policy, which I think might be fine because I'm not sure anybody has read this since 1997. Requests for trips that go beyond 300 miles or more than 3 days and all foreign travel must be approved by the board. The written consent of the parent or guardian of each student participating in all field trips, excursion, or travel is required. Not for nothing, this 25-year-old policy seems more in line with what might be rational than this.
Yeah,
what we're talking about.
This one seems tone deaf. So
I mean, there's Nature's Classroom, for example, which is it's 3 days. I mean, it's a significant trip.
Right. And yet I don't remember the boards ever approving that.
Yeah, what's interesting is, okay, so this gives me a little flashback to when Dr. McKinnon said, you may find that there are some policies that you no longer need.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This could be one of them, right?
Right.
Although I do think that older policy outlined things way better than what we see here, but maybe we don't need it.
It seems odd for us not to have a field trip policy, and it seems odd for a policy not to include the to mention parental consent.
If we are to have a field trip policy, I am more comfortable with the one on the books than the one that has been proposed.
Yep. Agreed. Okay, moving on to food allergies. So here's the one that I was mentioning before. So this is a management plan and guidelines for. It's a management plan. Okay, cool. Is it policy? Right? And is it or should it be considered policy because somewhere in state law or federal law it says you need to have a management plan and guidelines defined by the board? If that's the case, well, then I think we just treat all these things, whether they're called policy or they're called management plans or whatever, we just treat them all as policy, especially that Shipman's sort of put them in their model policy book. So.
Well, I agreed. I had the same comment as your note, John, and it felt like the school climate plan, for example, that you're required to have, but it's not policy. That's how this felt.
Yeah, and then the question becomes, well, who's responsible for it? Because I think we've settled on the regulations. That's the administration. Mm-hmm. Policy is us. Okay, well, what about management plan and guidelines? Is that us? Is that the administration? If it's the administration and it's not explicitly detailed in law that it should be the Board of Education defining that, then we don't need this, right? This is something that can be, save it as a regulation and give our administrators the reins.
Yeah. I'll note that this one has a series in the header, which the last one didn't, to the extent that that's meaningful at all in their cataloging.
Right. Okay. So I know we're not going to, we're very unlikely to do this, but it would be helpful to have every variation on policy and regulation and the sort of spectrum and some kind of assigned ownership of these things. But I think that's a 2-hour-long philosophical conversation that needs a lot of stakeholders, and I think we can just put that over here for now. Yeah. Should be. I feel like we need stronger language there. Good point, Kathy.
And that's one where it's to be careful what you wish for, because once you make it a shall, you've created a duty and you've created liability on the backside if the plan hasn't been reviewed on an annual basis.
Yeah, but when
And
you say
that's why I had a question mark.
right, but to say should is okay. We're in a triage hospital, and like that patient's never going to get seen. So how do we take the shoulds and turn them into it actually gets looked at, so that we don't end up with the problem of an ignored thing that could have been maintained properly.
Right. I don't know. I'm with you on the must side of this, because just thinking about turnover, we have a new school nurse at Barlow this year. On a yearly basis, we may be getting new nurses, like this is something that should be reviewed. This, and we talked about something else previously for the school nurse. So yeah.
Define reviewed, like reviewed with whom and for what standards and by what, with like, because I think there's already obligations that everyone associated with a 504 have reviewed it and be familiar with it. So, I mean, do you accomplish this in the 504 meeting?
And how many of these plans are there per school? For example, I don't know. It's not every student. But it could be 50 students.
Right.
It might be 10. I don't know.
Right. I have an allergy student. I don't know when this is reviewed. No idea. But I do know that they'll reach out and say, how do you feel about the cafeteria? What is the plan for your child in the cafeteria as they start to get older and things, shift a bit? But that's all that I'm aware of. So yeah, I really don't know how this works.
Okay. So it looks like, I think there's a question about the degree to which this is for us or maybe for someone else based on where this falls on the spectrum of, from regulation to policy. And then there's also the question of the should versus must and sort of cadence and process here. How do we think about, how do we want to treat this?
I think it's a quick question for Shipman as to whether or not there's a bona fide need for this to be a policy. And if there is, I think you probably go in the direction of not letting perfect be the enemy of good, but also flagging this legitimate question about should versus must, both from a internal process and procedures perspective and from an external, hey, Shipman, is this an intentional should or might it also be a must? But then that would come back in one of the quarterly revisions anyway that we could adopt accordingly.
Right.
Wouldn't the whole review be annual anyway? Because, and I don't know, Sarah, maybe you could speak to your individual experience, right? That it's collected every year, right? All of the health forms are collected every year to some degree. So by default, isn't that annual already anyway?
And it could be part of the file that they're creating in the nurse's office for your child, right? And it includes their medical form, your allergy form, their EpiPen information, et cetera, right? Whatever. And depending on the severity of the allergy, some students may not go straight to EpiPen. So they may instead go to Benadryl first, see how the child reacts. Does the Benadryl help for 30 minutes? If it does, they may not need it. So there's all these things. So maybe you're right. That's part of the review process. Yeah. I would hope that's when all of this happens, but
I'm not a school nurse and our schools are not enormous in the thousands of students. And so it would be my expectation if I were a school nurse that when I sat down in August before school opened, I would take out all of these files and look through them. So I was aware, here are the 10 or 15 kids most at risk I need to be aware of. Here are the other kids I need to be aware of, just so that you have that sort of general sense. That seems like professional conduct to me, but I don't know.
Yeah. And right. So maybe we just need clarification on this. It's probably already happening. We just don't know what the process is.
Okay, good. Fundraising activities. Oh, I didn't make any snarky comments on this one. Could have sworn I did. Yep, healthy food certification process exemptions. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, looking at the legal references, this is purely a cross-reference to the healthy food certification stuff that we do every spring. So everything else seems purely best practices, suggested, whatever. And that's where I raise this question of, do we want to specifically prohibit door-to-door sales? And I'm thinking the Barlow Football Drama Association is hosting a bake sale or a dinner, and they're selling tickets and they're sending people door to door to previous sponsors. This would be prohibited now.
Yeah, I don't know where that's coming from.
Right. What's the reason to create that prohibition? Is it a fear of sort of stranger danger and something's going to happen at somebody's door?
But if that's the case, I don't understand why it's here in this policy. I don't understand why Shipman wrote it into this policy. And there's later we're going to find another example of that where I'm just like, that's not. I think it's on homework. I wouldn't
dress code is a little bit funny. Yeah,
dress code especially too. It's like, where is this coming from? Like this is not just the facts, man. Right? There's some editorializing that's happening here that I don't think belongs in the sort of the way that we've been seeing the rest of the policy.
I mean, really, this is a healthy food policy, not a fundraising policy. Yeah. This is a policy that says that if you are to raise money for stuff, you need to be mindful of our healthy food certification obligations, which, among other things, probably say you can't sell your Rice Krispie treats during school hours. You have to wait until after hours, and it's covered there anyway.
Right.
Because sale of goods is covered in the healthy food policy to begin with. And if I'm selling T-shirts door to door, it has nothing to do with nutritional standards.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I mean, we did have Barlow cheerleaders come to our house, not recently, but before the pandemic, raising money for the stuff they were doing.
Right.
And with this policy, the Board of Education will not be responsible for such activities, whatever that means.
Yeah.
I would reject this. I mean, honestly, from a Barlow perspective too, the fundraising activities at all of the clubs and activities, I mean, they're all right. Maybe it's not literally somebody knocking on doors in a neighborhood, but it's effectively the same thing in substance. And there are funds that are allocated specifically, for those purposes, right? That we keep for years at Barlow, and we have a review to make sure that we're distributing them appropriately, and if we're holding them for a long time, that there's a process and mechanism to approve them to be distributed for purposes. Or I'm thinking of like graduation funds, right? Every graduation. I mean, so I don't think it's worthwhile. And I'm just looking through Region 9's policy. I can't find one that exists currently, so I would just reject this.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, and I think we'll ask about it, but absent a really compelling reason, I think we seem to all be recommending rejecting it. Graduation requirements. Yeah. Agreed.
I was interested in maybe none of you might be aware, but was it 2020, I think, by statute, there was a new law, which this is referring to, right? For the class of 2023, that's where I think we went from effectively 25, 50 credits or 25 equivalent, which equates to 50. And essentially our existing program of studies already complied with the statute ahead of it being applicable for all schools in the state. So essentially we're already in compliance. But I was struck at the level of detail that was in here. And I'm like, why do we need to one can always point, the program of studies is already very detailed in terms of how it complies with what's required, which to me, this could be shortened to say, here's the statute, go see program of studies for, how it's applied, right? I don't know that we necessarily have to enumerate every single thing and how but I would be interested in the administration's view on this.
I mean, can the policy be that the superintendent or his or her designee shall ensure that graduation requirements are always at least sufficient to state requirements and are published annually in the course of study. I mean, I guess the issue here in the comments from the Shipman drafting notes is, for example, you're required to have 1 credit of physical education. I believe, the Barlow board has adopted a stricter requirement than that. And that's where it's starting to diverge from just follow the law to what the board has formally adopted, which is effectively its policy.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I think, well, generally I would agree with we follow the law. Here, I think the law is the baseline. And I think that historically, Region 9 has made it its goal to ask more of its students than the bare minimum.
Here, here. Then is it our position that we reject this and keep the existing? I mean, that
Carol,
was
what's the
recently
existing-
updated.
Yeah, it's the existing policy is literally 2 paragraphs. And so perhaps it's going the other way. Graduation from Barlow means that students have satisfactorily completed the prescribed courses of study that have passed any exams and or standards established by the faculty and approved by the board, which covers, in my mind, the program of studies, and that they have fulfilled the legally mandated number. So it kind of threads the needle between this is the baseline, everybody in the state has to do this, but it also says, okay, whatever the faculty and the board have approved, that's what complies with graduation. So it to me, I think the existing one seems fine unless the administration says, hey, we need something more detailed.
Right. And we're going to give the administration an opportunity to obviously review all this. So
yeah.
They can make their case.
I mean, I feel like the answer might be somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. We do need something. It's just what's the right level?
Okay. Health assessments and screenings. Yeah, Kathy, I noticed this throughout. Sometimes they say the board, sometimes they'll say the district, sometimes they'll say the superintendent, and they're not all necessarily the same thing.
I made a similar note in a different policy, board versus district.
Yeah.
In this case, this seemed like it would be more appropriate, this notification coming from the superintendent versus coming from the board.
Right. I agree with that. I think this is a function of the person who wrote this, was thinking of the board or their designee, maybe, and not saying that.
And I know we've talked about this in prior policies too, and I've sort of tried to make that pitch that, they're using the board broadly to mean the board or its sort of operational staff. But the way that they flip back and forth suggests they're trying to make a distinction, but I don't think they are.
No, I think that's right. I think it's.
And I think it's a global question for Shipman about when they intend to make these distinctions and what these terms are intended to mean, so that somebody can clean them up so there's consistency.
Right.
Mm-hmm. This is the pre-enrollment assessment shall also include tests for tuberculosis, sickle cell anemia, or Cooley's anemia, and tests for lead levels in the blood if, after consultation, the board determines that such tests are necessary. Would that ever be the board, or would it be the superintendent?
Right. And if the board determines, how do we make that determination? When do we make that determination?
And right. Based on, I guess, in consultation with the medical professionals.
Right. I don't know that we have a great answer on this, because I think we have, there's meaty questions that we have here. I think we have to refer this one as well. Typo, right? Yeah. This one I actually think is going to require a little bit of discussion, unless someone sees another way.
Yeah, I agree. There's layers of complication in this.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's before you get into the substance of invasive physical examinations and how that's going to throw red flags for lots of people.
Right.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Right. Homeless students, policy regarding homeless children and youth. Yeah, short one. I don't think there's anything. No comments outside of the simple. Good immunizations.
It just says administrative regulations regarding immunizations.
Right. So it's all regs.
That's what it says in the title.
Right. Yeah. Especially links like these change all the time.
Yeah. This is what had me on that hobby horse today about links.
Yeah. I think the answer on this one would be yes. We do include this.
To the extent we're adopting this as a policy.
Right. Right. But the question is it a policy?
Right. And is there any reason not to apply sort of my comment about responsible staff member across all policies? Where they're asking us to plug in somebody's name, we should be plugging in the title so that we're not dealing with what happens when the...
Exactly. We're not going to update the policy every time we have a personnel change.
Right. That's
silly. Not tenable.
That's polite.
Yeah. Okay. So we... where are we landing on that? I think we're just looking for clarification. So that's a simple flag for, is this something, or is this regs, and we don't need to consider it.
Is it a thing?
Right. Is it a thing?
This is a cross-reference the non-discrimination in employment policy.
Yeah.
And I remember we had conversation about various definitions in there that had come out of statute, and we just want to make sure that we're being internally consistent with the way that we consider discrimination.
Right. Okay.
Well, there's a student policy and then an employee policy. Are there two policies because it's two different groups of people, so they need their own individual policy, or could we have one policy?
I had wondered that too. What gave me pause was sort of the rights one has as an employee in the discrimination context are slightly different than the rights that a student has in the discrimination context. It's inappropriate in both circumstances, but the remedies are different. And frankly, if we're trying to organize things in series, it makes sense to at very least have them cross-referenced. But
yeah. Go ahead. Siri agrees. So apparently we're good to do that.
The third member of the committee.
With Siri, we have quorum. Okay, good. Let's go. All right. That takes us to physical activity and student discipline. I found this one to be very interesting and wished that this policy was in effect at my high school. Especially the part about prohibition on compulsory physical activity as a form of discipline.
Well, it only applies during the educational program. It doesn't apply to extracurriculars or sports.
Yeah, I missed that. All right.
So this seemed to me like it applied entirely to elementary schools at this piece. For
This-
elementary school students,
Because that's purely from statute, which requires
Right.
elementary school students to get 20 minutes of physical education every day.
Right. I'm not crazy about the way that it waffles on, and it's probably that the statute waffles on, look, you can't take away kids' recess as a form of punishment unless you really want to, in which case go ahead.
Where are you
I-
getting that?
The administration may include additional time beyond the 20 minutes. No, hold on. Voted physical exercise, except that a planning and placement meeting. No, hold on, let me find it.
Except poses a concern to health and safety?
Disciplining schools by requiring students to engage in physical activity. No, let me find it. Boards have discretion in adopting rules to regulate the restriction as a form of discipline of time devoted to physical activity or undirected play. So it looks like they left it to individual boards' discretion to say, well, you can kind of, that we can regulate the restriction. Doesn't that mean that we can make it so that it's not as restrictive? And in fact,
Probably, but this policy suggests that we don't exercise that
right?
option, which I'm
Right.
fine with.
Yeah. Good. Okay. Good.
Oh, you're criticizing the statute, not the
Yeah.
model policy.
Well, but then in the model policy, it's telling us, hey, the statute kind of lets you, if you do want to give the power back.
Which is kind of interesting because in other statutes, in other policies where there's no statutory reference, it doesn't say, no, you don't need to do this, you have discretion.
Right.
It just says,
Right.
we're telling you to do this,
Right.
which is kind of silly.
Yeah. Anyways.
so though, for example, does this apply to middle school?
What's the definition of elementary school according to the state?
Let's see.
Or is it in the
Each
statute?
local and regional board of education shall require each school to offer a full daily lunch period of not less than 20 minutes and include in the regular day for each student enrolled in elementary school time devoted to physical exercise not less than 20 minutes in total, except that a planning and placement team may develop a different schedule for a child requiring special education. In the event of a conflict with this section, others, nothing shall prevent you from giving additional time.
So we don't guarantee that to middle schoolers, but
Well, is how I read it. So for example, at Helen Keller, they now have some free time, outside time at lunch. Would
Right.
they be able to, would this not apply to Helen Keller, for example?
unless we made it so, unless we went above and sort of beyond the requirements of the law and said that we extend this.
And I don't know what they do at, in
John
Reading.
Right.
I
Right,
guess
well,
it's an interesting question because if the law says you get at least 20 minutes and we're saying that here's your 20 minutes, elementary school kids,
Yeah.
we are not going to use that for punishment in any way. You're always going to get that 20 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
When it's silent about middle school students as far as what they're entitled to, but then it says we cannot discipline elementary school students.
Mm-hmm.
What rushes in to fill that void? I'm not sure.
Right.
It's an ambiguity that I
Right.
could argue both ways.
Well, what's also off-putting to me is the idea that in Easton you're guaranteed that right because you're in elementary school through 5th grade,
Mhm.
but in Reading, because in 5th grade you're now in middle school, you're not guaranteed. As a 5th grader, you don't need it if you live in Reading. Huh?
According to the Connecticut General Assembly, like if we created an elementary school that stopped at 3rd grade,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Now 1st graders are going straight into middle school. We're all set. Now we don't have to give them that. All right. I feel like we're off track. Let's. Bottom line here, I think this part of the policy, yes, doesn't specifically apply to elementary school students. by statute and by what's written in the policy. We could go outside of it, but
I think a medium here is to say that all elementary school students are entitled to 20 minutes. That's state law. In the next paragraph, where it says that we're not going to punish elementary school students by prohibiting them, you could take out elementary and you could basically say, whenever there is this time, it shall not be taken away from you. But I also don't want to step on sort of administrative prerogative and their thoughts about, well, in middle school, we have different measures of discipline and in-school suspensions and things that we don't want to step on.
Right. And 11, 12, and 13-year-olds to deal with. Okay. So I think where we're landing on this is not letting perfect be the enemy of good and saying we see opportunities here, but that the policy should be okay as is.
Right. Because none of this stops you from letting middle schoolers have outside time.
Right.
It theoretically allows you to discipline in them, but that's a different
question for maybe a later date, if everyone's comfortable with that.
That's fine.
Okay, that takes us to the pledge. Yes. I don't think, did anyone put comments here? Yeah, I don't think there was anything.
It's a model of brevity.
Yep. Good. Restraint and seclusion.
I really appreciated this policy.
Yeah, I agree.
I recall 4 years ago trying to work through a restraint and seclusion policy, and it was really thorny.
Yeah, I remember looking at the same policy, and when I opened this, I wasn't paying attention to the page count, and I thought there's going to be so much here, and I look, there's one page, and then regs. I'm like, yes, thank you. Okay, and no comments here. Moving on. Search and seizure. I also thought this was really well done. I liked just the way that they organized it, and I haven't seen it put in these really clear terms before, and appreciated it. And I think it strikes a good balance for making sure kids are getting their Fourth Amendment rights protected, while also making sure that, if we have a good reason, probable cause, that we can do what we need to do.
I agree, and I think something like this is going to be wonderful when it's easily searchable on a website.
Yeah.
Because parent hears that their kid's locker was gone through or whatever, they can come back and find this, make reference, clear up any confusion if they need to.
Yeah.
I was just struck by the use of the term office of the superintendent here.
I think if the previous policy and this policy were drafted by the same person, I'm going to give them the flourish that they brought to this.
That they've earned.
They earned it. All right. You can go ahead. Office of the superintendent. Sure.
I did just notice something that I did not when I read it earlier, but in 4, breathalyzers and other passive alcohol screening devices. Is that search and seizure?
Yeah.
It's the search.
Yeah.
It's the searching of your breath. Is that because? Yeah. Okay.
Are you concerned about current practice?
It just struck me as, what are you searching? Because you're not looking in somebody's locker for something, or their desk. You're actually asking them to breathe into a device versus. So, is that the same as a search?
It'd be the same as swabbing your cheek for DNA or drawing blood for other purposes.
Okay.
Okay, and then regs. Moving on to 504s. Agreed, Kathy. Be consistent.
That's just a
question mark.
right. Question mark. I didn't want to make anybody uncomfortable, so but that's overall, like, not just his policy, but it. Because I did not. Finally, I was like, I'm just going to write it down because the district and the board, is that the same thing,
Right?
Or is it different?
Right.
And this, I just wasn't sure what that meant.
Yeah, I didn't know what that meant either. I saw your question earlier.
That's a definition of free and appropriate public education, excluding the concept of free with respect to areas for which you have to pay fees to participate.
So it's
a textbook fee or a Chromebook fee or a
field trip fee.
A field trip fee is specifically excluded from the definition of free and appropriate, because what you don't want is somebody saying you're denying me FAPE because you're charging me $60 to play tennis.
Yeah.
But does that mean so a disabled student would not in any instance be subject to a fee?
I don't think it means that either, but I got the sense when I read it and I saw your comment that the parenthetical was intended to carve out those instances for the purpose of saving the definition of FAPE for sort of core education. I mean, the other way to think about it is in our preschools, we charge tuition to general education students, but we don't to preschool students with special needs because they're qualified from the age of 3.
It just struck me as I wasn't clear what that meant. Except for fees imposed, is that like pay to play a sport?
Yeah, that's what I thought that we were landing on. Is this means that all students are responsible when there is a fee assessed, for music or for a program that usually has a fee attached to it.
The way that Chris described it in regards to preschool made perfect sense to me, but in other ways, it doesn't make any sense that it's there. So, yeah.
If let's say that we charge for chess club, then all students, regardless of 504 or not, are responsible for that chess club fee.
Right. Okay, I get that.
Does that capture it? Or do we bring this to Shipman and ask them to answer it instead of us guessing and convincing ourselves that we know?
We might as well ask them, because I could probably come up with 3 new definitions too if we wanted to.
Cool. Okay. Student discipline. A lot of definitions. Policy of the board or is seriously disruptive. Sorry, I'm missing the point here, Kathy.
I read this several times. So suspension, students may be suspended for conduct on school grounds, etc., that violates a publicized policy of the board or is seriously disruptive of the educational process or endangers persons or property. That's suspension. Expulsion violates a publicized policy of the board and is seriously disruptive of the educational process or endangers persons or property. So the difference between deciding a suspension or an expulsion hinges on that and or.
Yeah, that's how it reads.
Well put. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, and it's kind of a combination of the two, right? Because either does this and is seriously disruptive, or so it's
So for example, you could not, in theory, you could not suspend somebody if it were an or, you would have to expel them if it were an and. The difference between a suspension and expulsion could be very important to somebody.
Yeah. Oh, sure. Of course. I wonder, well, and even here, it's still, you're just, yeah, just.
If you walk it backwards, endangers persons or property is a single criteria for suspension or expulsion.
Mhm.
So if you endanger a person or property, you can be either suspended or expelled.
Mhm.
If you violate a publicized policy of the board, and that's all you do, you can be suspended but not expelled. If you are seriously disruptive to the educational process, but do not endanger anybody and do not violate a public policy of the board, you can be suspended but not expelled. If you violate a policy and are disruptive to the educational process, you can be expended or expelled. So danger to person or property is always either, but violating the educational process or violating another policy requires both to be expelled or either to be suspended.
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of intended, but
that was helpful. And I drew the picture of the matrix in my head as you did that, sort of the check boxes, this and this column and this row, check, this column and this column and this row, check.
Yeah.
It might be actually helpful to make this policy more clear if we had an exhibit like that.
So that's how I read it too. So just to be clear that there is the difference in determining the discipline here. It hinges on that and or.
And I wouldn't say the difference in the discipline. I would say the difference in the available discipline.
Right.
Because it's a sort of menu of choices for the administration and the board to determine based on the severity of the offense. And you have to check either of one or two for expulsion to qualify. Even if you just seriously disrupt the educational process, but you don't violate a policy, you can never be expelled for that, as egregious as it is.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I would say that there's some subjectivity in what really seriously disruptive would mean.
Mm-hmm.
Ask any person, you'll get, different answers.
And even this is just to sort of qualify for that as a disciplinary possibility. For expulsion in particular, there's more steps, right? There's more that happens, not just you've checked this box and that box. Well, okay, that means that you could start that process, but that doesn't mean that it's done.
Well, and this doesn't mandate those.
That's right.
That discipline. It's
although there is some mandating. There's some language that is very mandatey.
Yes.
I don't think that's how you say that.
No, but there is. I noticed the same thing.
Yeah, I found it a little troubling. All right.
Well, we're sort of on this grammatical kick here. Between A and B, it's also notable that when you are purely off school grounds, in order to be disciplined, you need to have the violation of policy and disruption piece. Mm-hmm. That is a prerequisite for expulsion in school, but is not sufficient for one or the other is not sufficient for suspension when it occurs out of school.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's a number of different pathways here, depending on what the circumstances
are. It could be for online issues, but there could be other circumstances, not specifically in the online space, where this could come into play.
Right. I was just, so for example, if somebody behaves, I guess, if they're at a soccer game and it's not they're on a travel team, unrelated to school.
Right.
And they do something that potentially, I guess, violates a policy and is seriously disruptive of the educational process,
Right.
that would be subject to
Good.
discipline.
It could be. Yeah. And that I think that's also in our most recent bullying policy that we reviewed. We talked about those cases and why it matters. And I think that inclusion of the disruptive nature of this to the educational process, that's what brings it into play, because even if it happens outside of the school, outside of anything related to the school, it can come back into the school as something that's grossly disruptive, especially if it's including other students of the school.
Right. So I guess to Chris's grammatical point there, this says off school grounds, they would have to do both of those things.
Right. Right.
Not just one. They could do one.
Right.
But not the other, and they would not be subject to any disciplinary action.
Right.
Right.
And I
All
guess
right.
it's still subjective, right? Because let's say you were on that travel team and you were engaging in some hazing or something to an underclassman.
Yep.
It seems like it's just that one thing, but now this underclassman no longer wants to return to school.
That's right.
So then it can become disruptive to the educational process, or it could be sexual harassment, whatever it might be, right? It may not be evident immediately.
Mm-hmm.
Time could, I guess, shift the scenario.
Yeah, it's what proves that it is in fact disruptive to the educational process is time is a necessary dimension to it.
So John, you could clear my comment there.
Chris, did you have something here? Were you highlighting something?
I was just moving the mouse around.
Okay.
But this was a bona fide comment about whether or not this is intended to be an exhaustive list of misconduct or not. Because as it reads now, it is an exhaustive list, I believe.
Including but not limited to is below. It's on the page break.
No, but that's only the disciplinary action, which is including but not limited to.
Oh.
It doesn't qualify the conduct. It basically says the following list is an exhaustive list of things that may include discipline, that may include these things and other things.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure that I'm comfortable saying that these are the only 41 things. I mean, I guess the catch-all is in 40 and 41, which says any other thing that we don't like, but But that's also qualified with this danger to persons, seriously disruptive, and whatever.
Although I think seriously disruptive is a pretty reasonable qualifier there. So do we think we want to refer this, going back up to this guy, and say let's bring this to Shipman?
Yeah, I'm looking at the existing Region 9 policies on expulsion, and there are two. One is, and both are pretty extensive. One's more procedural, so that I'd say, well, do we need a policy to list the procedures other than having the communication to, whoever's affected, the employees, administration, parents, students, on what to do. And then there's another fairly lengthy policy that looks due process, actions that lead to suspension, and regulations. So I think what we're probably going to what I would support is the current Shipman version presumably has it's fairly current regs, so it looks like it's just been updated to encompass all of the regulations, but yet probably just make sure from the administration that if we were to adopt that we're just covering all the possible scenarios or giving them flexibility to not have the list be all exhaustive.
I mean, 38 in particular, you could drive a truck through. I was at Barlow today and I took a picture of a group of students who were eating lunch one of them was my friend, 12 of them weren't, and now I've used my privately owned electronic device to take a picture of somebody else without their explicit permission.
Yeah.
And I can be suspended. I mean, that's a little bit concerning, but I don't think that would ever happen, but that's just how it reads.
No, I think that's a good, I think that's a good point to raise, because somebody might raise it. It ends up on Facebook and somebody says, I don't want my child on Facebook. You violated 38.
Right. I want them suspended because they took my kid's picture in school.
Right. And then we were having all these questions about the prosecutorial discretion that's being used and whether it's being applied equitably and et cetera, et cetera.
So now, just to be clear, this is all conduct which would violate the publicized policy of the Board of Education. So we go back to the question of, when you violate a public policy, what does that trigger? And you can be suspended if you just do that. It's or in that section. So it qualifies you for suspension straight away without necessarily being expulsion.
Right.
And if it occurs off school, it doesn't need the and, so that's fine. So any photograph somebody takes with their iPhone in any of the schools, if they're a student, subjects them to theoretical suspension. I don't think that's what anybody intends.
Right. No, this is a flag.
It looks like Kathy has a ghost. Suddenly the doors open, this one and then that one. Somebody's just trying to get a snack.
It's a very small ghost. Punched over so they are not seen on camera.
All right. What do we want to do with this one? Is this one? I mean, this is in the same ballpark in terms of the weight as some of the other ones that we've rejected because we know there's a lot to it: bullying and safe school climate, etc. I think we're saying our current policies need some work. This seems like one that we need a deep dive on if we're going to adopt the Shipman policy. What's our attitude towards this?
I tend to agree because, for example, you had, when the policy was up on the shared screen, somebody had highlighted must.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
for example, yes.
I have questions here.
So for example, a fourth grade Cub Scout brings their new pocket knife to school. They've just earned their wood chip and they're so excited.
Yeah.
They bring it to school. It's on the bus. The bus driver says, you can't have that there. They turn it into the principal. Is that a must recommend expulsion proceedings?
It's a must recommend expulsion.
Right.
So they have to recommend it.
Rejected, but yeah, that seems like a lot. And a kindergartner.
So, and I understand the intent, which is it's
right.
You shouldn't be doing that. However, must is I'm just questioning. I'm just raising the issue because that's a very it shouldn't happen, but it could happen, and it's
there should be some kind of discretion there, it seems to me, but
I agree.
Unless the law requires. If the law says no, sorry, that you have to, and the way out of that is that recommendation can be rejected either by the superintendent before it comes to the board, or it comes to the board and the board's consent.
So Connecticut General Statutes 10-233D says that expulsion proceedings pursuant to this section shall be required for any pupil K-12 whenever there is reason to believe that they on school grounds or at a school-sponsored activity was in possession of a firearm or a deadly weapon or dangerous instrument, etc. So the policy is written straight from the expulsion statute. There's not a whole lot of discretion.
Right. So that's why
it seems like they're out and out crimes. I mean, it's possession of firearms and in selling, substances. I mean,
Right.
it's
Use of a
saying
dangerous
recommend. I mean, the wording is recommend. I mean, so in what instances wouldn't we make a recommendation if somebody has a firearm on the premises that?
Yeah.
I think it's sort of Kathy's point of the innocent 9-year-old who thinks it's cool that he just learned how to carve wood and doesn't think it's a big deal to bring his pocket knife in his backpack.
Right.
And
Doesn't consider it a deadly weapon of any kind. Right. This is what I use to whittle,
sticks. Right.
Yeah.
But it fits squarely within the definition of something that would be an expellable offense. And frankly, there's going to be a difference in perception between a 9-year-old doing it and a 16-year-old doing it, because a 16-year-old is not going to have the same level of lack of culpability there.
Right.
But that's just a function of, okay, so you go through and you notice the expulsion hearing, and I think the outcomes are probably different, and that's fine. That's just a board.
That's why there's a hearing.
Task, right?
Right. To hear the facts and to make sure that justice is served. Okay. Then I think in light of the fact that it's sort of language straight from statute, I think, unless we have other content, the student agreed.
I'm going to guess this is very closely patterned.
Yeah.
Well, this is an overall question because it says there are 2 options for a hearing panel.
Mm-hmm.
Hearings conducted by the board will be heard by any 3 or more board members. So a quorum is not required. Is that
right?
The understanding?
Right.
And then,
and I think a part of that, Kathy, is the number of times where a member may have to recuse themselves. You start running out of board members. Like, you think about someone like if you were sitting on the Easton Board of Ed, if we were both on the Easton Board of Ed, like how many 7th graders do we know well enough? Like, I can't sit on that. Like, I would have to recuse myself for almost any 7th grader. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that it was just a question there. And then going down, my next question was the procedures for this hearing seemed to be all related to option 1, not option 2, the impartial hearing board. But maybe when they say board in the procedures down below, they're referring to both options. That was my next question, just to clarify.
That's my read on it. So, and I think it's not making us choose in policy. I think it's simply saying that either one of these are options in any given situation.
Right. I think having the flexibility is helpful on a case-by-case basis.
Right.
Yeah. No, I'm not questioning the flexibility because I think that's good. But if you continue down in the policy where it says hearing procedure, is when they refer to the board members and council, does that refer to both boards, the impartial board that does not include any board members by definition, or is that
can that refer to either of the board groups of people sitting in adjudicative capacity, whether it be the impartial hearing board or the subset of the Board of Education?
I think these hearing procedures apply to either. Yeah. Should we? I think we should take that question and maybe a couple of others to Shipman as it relates to this policy.
It just gets back to the overall comment about board is capitalized here, which typically refers to the Board of Education. And up in item 2, where it says impartial board, it is not capitalized. So it's just clarity.
Yeah.
Right, because when it talks about the impartial hearing board, it says that no member of the capital B board may be on that panel. And then when it's discussing the procedures, it's all about capital B board members and their obligations in that capacity.
Right. Yes. So it's just to clarify, are the hearing procedures identical for either option 1, for both options, 1 or 2?
Right. And it seems like a reasonable assumption that that's the case, but maybe we just...
But as written, it's not. I think Kathy is right about that it's...
Because
the way that it's written suggests that it's only with respect to a board panel. that these procedures apply. An impartial hearing officer could theoretically do whatever it is that they want, would be the implication.
Yeah, but that seems odd to me. To me, the hearing panel is who's going to be a part of the hearing. This is how is the hearing going to.
It feels like this could be cured with a footnote in D1 after the first use of board members, where it says throughout section D, board members shall also refer to hearing panel members.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so I think let me just double check. Fine. And I think that is down to reg. So I think we close that guy and we go to refer this. We want to sort of bring this up with Shipman. Where are we at? Student dress. Come on. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't understand. I don't understand this policy because if you go read the statute, this just isn't.
It's just the Crown Act, isn't it?
Yeah, this has nothing. Like, why are we talking about kids got to take their windbreakers off?
I'm cold in class. Sorry, I got to take it off. Like,
right. I
don't
couldn't
understand what
figure
we're
out
doing.
if this was pre-pandemic life. So they were like, pre-pandemic, everybody had lockers. You don't need to carry stuff around. Now nobody's using lockers still, or they don't want to, or they're choosing not to.
Right.
it was last revised in 2021. So.
That was weird.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I didn't understand.
The referenced reg is specifically for head wraps, hairstyles.
Right. It's the specific act the legislature passed about basically non-discrimination on hairstyles.
Right.
Like 46A is a non-discrimination statute.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Seems out of context.
Yeah, I just didn't. I mean, if the kid wants to wear the jacket, let him wear the jacket.
It's not even a school-based statute under Section 10. Like it's.
Yeah.
So I think we're saying reject.
I would be fine rejecting this. However,
Wear with Mars floors or safety hazard. Yeah.
that takes care of us. Okay,
That's everybody.
but I wonder about our existing dress code and the degree to which it's actually well crafted. Because I don't think this is well crafted. I don't think that this connects with our communities, and like I don't think that we have a huge amount of problems with this. We may need to hear from administration to help us understand. But certainly attire and accessories depicting or suggesting violence, that vulgarity, like, okay, I get that.
Right.
The current policy in Reading from good old 1997 on this topic says that restrictions on student dress may be applied whenever the mode of dress is unsafe to the student or those around, is disruptive to operation of schools, is contrary to law, or causes damage.
Like that sums it up well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And no restrictions shall be imposed which reflect discrimination as to civil rights, enforce particular codes of morality or religious tenets, attempt to dictate or adjudicate style or taste, or don't fall within the direct or implied powers of the board.
Yeah.
I think that's fine.
Yeah.
I would question, is this a policy or a code?
Right. Yeah. Kathy, I think that's right too. It's like, is this all regs?
Because in Barlow, it's in the student handbook that the students must read and sign.
Right.
There is a dress code that they are required to read and sign that they've read it, and then it's a code, not a policy.
Yeah.
At least in that context.
Right.
I think that's where you get into sort of the policy that exists in Reading now from 25 years ago is very high level. It's don't break stuff, don't break people. We're not going to violate your civil rights, and we're not going to impose religion on you by telling you what you can wear or not wear. then that's left to the administration to operationalize, to say, what we mean is you don't have swastikas on your shirts and you don't do this and you don't do that. And I know it was an issue in Reading, I want to say 6 years ago at the middle school, where there was a whole discussion about the dress code and it got revised as a result of that. But that was an operational dress code that was revised by administration in response to board concerns, as opposed to the board setting an operational policy.
Yeah, I definitely favor that approach, which
Yeah.
to me seems like if I'm reading the discussion right, that we would recommend that we reject this. Is that true?
I would reject it. And the question is whether we are replacing existing policies with nothing in this context, or whether we're maintaining existing policies as to this topic. I'm sorry, I read the Region 9 policy, but I'm sure it's the same one in Reading.
It looks like it's all three, Chris.
Yeah, that's 5132.
So I mean, we could also make a recommendation to just renew whatever's in place. It's currently standardized throughout all three districts, and it seems
inoffensive as drafted right now.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that this one could be construed as offensive in some ways. So.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I have an appointment to go see the eye doctor. Leave me alone. Okay. Student privacy. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I-
a lot
I
of
thought
points
this-
here.
I thought this policy was fraught with flags, red flags. I thought this policy, there is in no way that I could, I this needs so much discussion, and there are so many things in here that are big things.
I'm scrolling down to the legal references.
I think that there's a key distinction in here on the survey topic between those which are funded by the United States Department of Education and those that aren't. I don't understand what the distinction is, but I assume that there are some specific regulations that are associated with that. What I further don't know is what surveys we ever administer that are funded in whole or in part by US DOE, and whether this matters at all to our purposes.
Right. I wasn't terribly fond of this one. I don't think it does a great job. Are we comfortable? I mean, do we speak to this in our current policy?
Does anyone have this pulled up in our current policy?
There is, because I know it comes up. And there was a point in time, and we may still have 3 different policies on this, because when we did the ERCCC survey 5-ish years ago, it came to the board several times because different boards had different obligations as to what was opting in and opting out. And the Reading board amended its policies so that it went from an opt-in to an opt-out around the same time. There was a whole rigmarole around this very topic.
All right.
So this is like a flag for discussion.
Yeah.
We don't want to adopt it, but we don't have anything that's super current. So we need to put it on our top priority list potentially.
So Region 9 adopted a policy in 2018 called Surveys of Students, parentheses, Student Privacy, that addresses this topic about U.S. Department of Education, political affiliation, a parent may request a copy, superintendent annual notice from schools. That's the only thing that comes up under survey when I searched the policies. But I
Okay.
feel like there was an opt-out, opt-in question at some point with another policy that's similar. Cheryl, do you remember that?
I remember the discussion, yeah, because the opt-in, like the specific requirements in the ERCCC survey, it ended up being an opt-in. And it was definitely an opt-in at Barlow. I'm not sure what happened with the K.
I think it was an opt-out in Reading because our policies were different at the time.
Yeah.
And it was one of these, like, everyone was, frustrated.
Yeah.
I mean, right now, Region 9 has a policy around specific student privacy around surveys of students. And it's quite, it's quite long. It was approved in 2018. And then there are like model notification of rights under, and then there are multiple forms that follow that policy.
Reading adopted the same policy without all of the forms and regulations. It's just 2 pages. And we adopted it in 2019. I think it was in the heat of all of this to make it consistent. I think we took the same language Region 9 was already using, which includes at the end of it, parents shall have the opportunity to opt out of each survey, analysis, or evaluation. And so that's where we got into this default opt-out posture. And I'm going to guess that Easton has the same policy.
Yeah, it looks like Easton also adopted something in 2018.
There are multiple opt-out options here. They have there's multiple forms at the bottom of a policy.
Of the shipment policy?
No, of the Region 9 policy.
I see. Okay.
Easton has the same policy with the parental opt-out in the last sentence. It was adopted in September of 18, so 5 or 6 months before Reading adopted it. It includes these model forms that Region 9 has and Reading doesn't, because consistency.
Okay.
This is just it's just student privacy and data privacy, and is a huge hot button for many people. And there's just a lot of stuff in here all around your like some of this. If I read it correctly, this policy refers to survey results become part of your education record in some cases.
That's to make them confidential.
Yes, but they're still part of your education record, is the
And
way
if
I
they're
read
not,
it.
they're public documents. That's the other side of it. That's why they're classifying them that way.
But
Yes.
then
but
the question is who then has access to that
And when your educational records are released for a college application, for example, are the answers to those surveys part of that record?
There was a table. Hold on, let me.
And that's only surveys that include PII anyway, which is going to be a relatively small class of surveys, I would think.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think as a general matter we're distributing surveys that have PII tied to it.
There better be a table in here. Oh no. There you go. So basic biographical information, academic achievement, date of high school graduation, records of immunizations, attendance records, notice of expense. And there was another table somewhere else as well, because this is not including a couple of things. And I made a note. There was a piece that actually in the table, maybe it's, here we go. Where it's basically left to the classroom teacher to do something. And it was like, we've got all these files the reason that it's stuck in my mind is we've got all these different ways of thinking about the data and how it's treated, which is good. But nowhere in here was there a, how about the student's learning plan? And their sort of portfolio of work towards that learning plan and sort of the evidence of their progress and all of that. It's like, sure would be nice if we had that as well, not just the sort of cumulative file and the health file and the pupil personnel file. So I think these tables help a little bit, Kathy, to sort of explain how putting this into a file helps to create protection of that data, but doesn't necessarily mean that it can be accessed by colleges who are looking at that file.
Well, I don't think colleges are school officials in the FERPA context. Colleges don't have a per se right to your educational file. You decide what you release to them.
You have to, yes, you sign a written authorization to release records.
Right, but it's not a broad release of all educational records.
Right, but I think people are right to be concerned about the use of data and where it can go and how it can be misused. I think there's some really alarming stuff going on right now with data brokers. There's basically no rules. It's the Wild West. I could go look for data and probably find it on everybody here. And it's like, why should I have access to that? I shouldn't. So
your note is on page 8 of the documents in front of you, John, about individual teachers.
Yeah. Thank you.
I think specifically around surveys, which have been a sensitive topic in our towns recently. I think if people feel that a survey response could be linked in any way to their educational record, whether it's confidential or not, that may make some people feel very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I also think it could potentially compromise the results of a survey.
Yeah.
Because if people feel like it's going to be attached to their education record, are they going to answer at all? Or are they going to answer truthfully? It's just a.
I think that's why every survey I'm familiar with that has been brought to the board's attention over the past 5-7 years has been strictly on an anonymous basis. There's no PII attached to it.
Yeah, and I think we need to do a better job of, the policy needs to do a better job of explicitly stating that sort of the circumstances where you would find PII, like what are they? Because I don't know of any case where we're actually doing that.
My big concern about PII comes in open-ended questions to school climate surveys, where it says, tell me more. And they say, Johnny was mean to me on Thursday in Mrs. Smith's class. Suddenly, I know exactly who you are.
Well, yes. And the other answers on the survey could be the sensitive part, not just the part about what Johnny did. Right. But that's, I think, a whole nother ball of wax to think about how you do a sort of initial pass of that and anonymize where necessary.
Right. I mean, that's where you get into what is FERPA, and that's, you get into, can reasonably determine who it is. It doesn't need to say it's John Simpson. It can say, that guy who lives in Easton.
Right. But yeah, so I agree. This is a really sensitive topic. I think we need to get this right. I don't think that the existing policy is sensitive in the ways that it needs to be, or that the Shipman policy is sensitive in the ways that it needs to be. It's possible that our existing policy, even if it's not necessarily the same, can get us through for now. My thought is that we.
I tend to agree, and I think we'd rather put something together that is right than adopt this for the sake of adopting it, when we already have something in the background that is sufficient.
I think that's right.
I agree as well. I agree.
So that's the.
But to further complicate all 3 districts, have separate data privacy policies,
Yeah.
and which are not the same.
Right.
So two of the districts have the same, relatively the same data privacy. They're called something different, online something or other. And then the other one's just completely different.
Right.
So this would, and I applaud the effort to try to combine the it's agnostic to the form of the privacy, which I think is from a conceptual perspective makes more sense to me.
Yeah.
But because then what, you know, if you kind of provide detail on how the privacy could be, you know, or how the privacy should be protected, then you go down procedural, you know, process that we shouldn't be involved in. But I guess I'm just agreeing that, you know, if we change something, it's going to open up a can of worms, not just because of no, it's been controversial, but also because there's no conformity at all.
Right. So that is for. So I think we would say we reject the PPRA for FERPA. Here. We do not. Do any of our districts have a law enforcement unit?
No.
Right. Okay. Yep. So those are not applicable. Defined elsewhere as first and last name. Oh, I see. They're just using student name and first and last name.
They're creating an ambiguity by accident.
Yep, agreed.
So I know that, you know, in the elementary school, when the teachers say we're putting together a directory of everybody in the class, you need to affirmatively tell me whether you want to be in that directory or not, and then I will disclose it to you. This suggests that we will disclose a directory unless somebody objects.
Kathy or Sarah, do you know how that works in Easton? In like the elementary schools, I don't remember opting in, but I thought our info was there.
I think you had to send the teacher your email address, and right, so you're opting in. Please provide your information, and then I'll send a class list. And there would be times where one or two of the students in the class weren't listed.
Okay.
I've been to a lot of open houses where I've been asked to sign in for that purpose.
Was it my kids?
I was going to say, I think it was often at the open house, the beginning of the year, or the meet the teacher day in Easton, at least, they would ask you, do you want to be included on the class list, the class contact list? And then that's how I remember it being done at Samuel Staples.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, I think you're right. We require opt-in because the teachers don't automatically have it.
Right. And I don't remember why that is. I feel like it has changed since my kids have been in the school, and it used to be the other way, but I could be wrong about that too.
Well, and it could have changed since I was it was a few years ago since I was at Samuel Staples, so it may be different now.
Yeah. But I know as recently as this year, and for the past as many years I can recall, it's been tell me if I can tell other people that your kid is in my class kind of thing.
Okay. So we'll add that, we'll flag it.
And frankly, I think opting out is more administratively efficient when there's a 99% opt-in anyway.
Yeah. But I don't know that we necessarily want to change that practice right now. Contractors and other outside agencies with access to educational records.
I mean, is it like testing companies? I'm guessing this is because
speech language pathologists who might be contracted out.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess the question here is, and maybe this was made clear in the policy, but for example, does this require parental release, or a student who's 18 years or older to release records to contractors and other outside agencies? Or is the school able to allow access to education records as long as they certify their compliance with confidentiality requirements.
And almost certainly specific to the student or students that they're working with.
And it's covered under school official. A school official is anybody employed by or contracted by the district, including contractors, consultants, volunteers, members of the boards of education, etc. So I think that here they're basically just saying that as a condition of working with our district, you'd be covered as a school official under FERPA, but you need to certify to us that you're going to comply with the law.
Okay, you can clear that, John.
Okay. 45 days. Yeah. Is this a function of that's the maximum?
I'm going to guess I'm going to guess that's what the law says. I have no idea.
Yeah.
All right. I just think that's like forever when you need your education records. And in section F, that's 10 days. So I don't see why they wouldn't be consistent.
And it may be a function of statute.
It may be.
It does say we'll make education records available for inspection and review by parents or eligible students within a reasonable period of time. And then it's giving us 45 is the worst case scenario. So
I mean, I could conceive of a request being made on July 6th and being told that nobody's working. We have no staff in July and August on the in the secretary's office. So and everybody's on vacation. So 45 days is the most reasonable period of time in that circumstance.
Well, I would refer to the budget line items of summer hours, and I would say I'm shocked there's nobody there able to pull those records within 45 days.
Yeah. I'm sure we could make it more restrictive. We could make this 10 days, but then I think we need administration to weigh in and help us to understand the nuance of delivering on that.
To be clear, on special ed, it's not 10 days, it's 10 school days. And so a request on July 5th would not be due until September 10th.
Yep.
Oh, because you're over the summer.
Right. School breaks and weekends do not count in F. They count in E.
So, okay, that's a good catch. That's true. All right. I just thought that was a long period of time. And I do see if it's over the summer, that's 2 months. So I
think we can still check with administration, because if they say, actually we always have somebody here and 10 days would be easy for us to do, I think we bring it to them in the interest of making that experience, which could be quite painful when you're in the middle of trying to do this kind of work, making that experience as good as possible for our.
Well, if you're trying to move or your child's trying to transfer schools, that exactly. 45 days is a long time.
Very painful. Right. So we'll check with administration and see if we can do better.
Just from an administrative perspective too, I mean, aren't we in the age where things can be stored electronically?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Sorry, that's a little bit of an editorial, but really?
Okay. Have you been in an elementary school recently?
I know, but I'm looking at the definition of materials. But again, it could be scanned, but again, I digress.
Push a button and have all those records sent where you need them to go immediately. That'd be nice. All right. Chris, you're saying we have a choice here?
Yeah, are we charging per page or not?
I would say we should be consistent with our FOIA policy or practice, which is to charge.
Yeah, I think that's, in this case, they're entitled to the first one's free anyway.
Right.
So charging 50 cents a page for the second one doesn't seem crazy.
Right.
But to Cheryl's point, could you not get an electronic copy? Is that?
Yeah, that'd be nice.
The question is whether this is charging per printed page or not, because if you send a PDF that's 100 pages, can you still charge $50?
That'd be crazy. So could we offer, you get your first printed copy free, and then after that, we can give you a free digital copy. But if you want a second, third, fourth print copy, then we'll charge you per page.
I mean, we're getting awfully lost in the weeds on this.
I agree.
Like the model policy says charge or don't charge, and I'd be happy to say either for a second copy, and so to just move on in the interest of not making perfection the enemy of good here.
Do we have?
We're deep into what happens when a general education student wants to see their record here.
What do we say? Charge or no charge?
I'm happy to keep it consistent with FOI and just say that the future charges are 50 cents a page.
Everyone agree?
But I mean, frankly, it feels like a regulation because that fee could change at any time.
Yeah, we could not say the fee per page here and just say whatever the going rate for FOIA is.
Better.
That works for me.
Yeah. Okay. Additional copies will be charged consistent with the fees incurred for FOI requests.
Yeah.
So you get one free copy and then it's
not for FOIA. For FOIA, it always starts with the first copy is you're charged per page. But that doesn't mean this changes. In this one, first copy is free, and then subsequent copies are charged at the FOIA rate. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. I know there's a bunch of words there. Opt-outs allowed for a party seeking directory information?
Yes, for example, isn't the military, that's directory information, but you are able to opt out for that. So that seemed contradictory to an exception.
So this is a log of all requests, does not include a request for directory information?
So the record log requirement does not apply to requests from or disclosure to a party seeking directory information. So you would not have to log a party seeking directory information. There are opt-outs. It wasn't clear to me. I didn't.
So this section is saying I need to keep. B says I need to keep track of every time somebody asks me for information. Mm-hmm. C says I don't have to do that when the person asking for John's kids' information is John or John's kids.
Right.
I don't have to do that when somebody is asking me for directory information. Can you give me the class list for Mr. Smith's class? I don't have to do that when somebody has presented me with a consent.
Right, and I think Kathy's concern, and frankly mine as well, is why if a party seeking directory information, it feels like there should be a record of that.
This record is a permanent part of the student's educational record and must be available to the parent or eligible student upon request.
So are we saying a party seeking directory information that would be tracked somewhere? It just doesn't. It wouldn't be tracked along with the student's record. My concern is it's weird for somebody to go in and say, "Tell me who's in Miss Miller's class." Frankly, I would want the average person off the street who's asking for that to first meet with no.
when the kids though sign up though, isn't it part of the forms where is part of the forms that are required to be filled in? So there's already that presumably that I'm trying to remember when my kids were younger. There's presumably that consent from the beginning. So then why track it again?
You're talking about the consent of
the directory information.
Directory.
Yeah, I mean, I would have the same concern, right? Because the rest of it, 1, 3, and 4 are there's approval provided by the appropriate people, right? And 2 that's this weird outlier, if you will. But is there some permission that's provided at the beginning of the class when that class starts, right? I don't know. I mean, it's been a while since I went through that, but I do vaguely remember some of that. You're a room parent. Can you put your name on this list? No, then I'm not going to give it out.
I think this is another thorny one, and I expect that we're being compliant with applicable law today, and I would punt this one because I think I want to make sure we get this right. I mean, the state of Connecticut was out in front on some sort of student data privacy work that I think we can be pretty proud of, but the ways in which this data is being used and will be used in the future, it's alarming. And I think the work we do now to protect our students' data from being exploited will serve them well in the future.
So directory information will not be released when requested by a third party unless the release of such information is determined by the administration to be in the educational interest of the school district and is consistent with the district's obligations under state and federal law. That's on the top of page 17 under D, where it talks about directory information specifically.
Yes, but why would they still not be required to log that information? So if somebody says, I got this mailer or I got a whatever from somebody, why did you send the directory to them, or who sent the directory to them, and for what reason? Or or somebody says, Joel Barlow sent me your name and contact information and said you might be interested in this service, and there's no log or record of it at all. And by the way, students or parents may not want to have been part of that anyway, whether they were in the directory or not. I don't feel as that it's necessary clear to people when they opt in to be in the directory, that directory is a free mailing list to whoever the administration deems appropriate.
Yeah. And unfortunately, it's much more nefarious. The way that data brokers are using this data, it goes way beyond a mailing list. It's really gnarly. And, I'm happy to send around some recommended reading on the subject for anyone interested. I would suggest we punt on this one. I suspect we already have policy that puts us in good stead. And then I think this becomes a part of a collection of, I'm guessing, somewhere between 5 and 10 meaty policies that over time we work through.
I think this policy is intertwined very closely with the student privacy policy. Yeah. They're very similar in many ways.
Yeah. Do we think we can punt on this one for now?
Yeah, I think it falls into the category of potential landmine to getting this whole thing done.
Yeah. Okay. District computing systems. Quick check in here. So we have a few left. They're less gnarly than the ones we just went through. Until we get down to Title IX, which I'm just going to say, is it safe to just say right now the Title IX, we're going to flag those and reject for now? Because we have.
Didn't we just do Title IX with the past 2 years? Past year?
Yeah, like a year and a
6
half
months.
ago. Yeah. Do we all agree to that?
We did title in them on Zoom, so we can pass it.
Yes. So reject. Just looking at the page numbers, do we want to soldier on, or do we want to say we've given it the good effort and we're going to pause for now? I'm happy to keep going if others are interested.
Or you want to try a couple of the one pagers and
Yeah.
get through
Quick
those.
wins.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah,
Let's
that's a good
talk
idea.
Yeah. I'm happy. I think some of these are very simple, and I'm happy to soldier on and get it done.
Yeah.
Because John, you and Sarah have to pull together a list for
Right.
Shipman and Goodwin, and
Right.
So if we can, I think they are simpler, many of them.
I don't understand why this homework one is in here at all. I went and read the statute. It has nothing to do with what this is.
221B, that's the catch-all for most of these policies.
Yeah.
The Board of Education shall.
Right. And it says that the Board of Education shall something on homework, and this policy is basically something on homework.
Yeah.
This is idiotic, and I would pass it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
You just need to say what you're thinking, Chris.
I try. As you can
Wait.
tell from my comments, the later the hour gets, the more blunt I become.
So wait, when you say pass it, you mean
Reject it, like pass on it.
Okay, good. Okay. Okay. Let's look at some others. Alternative assessments. Is eligible to particular unclear? Kathy, did you have?
Maybe I just was jumbled, but this sentence did not make sense to me. I felt like it was missing something. Decisions, I thought there was a missing word. Decisions about whether a student with a disability eligible for special education and related services under the Individuals with Disabilities Act shall participate in alternative assessments to particular statewide or district-wide assessments shall be made. I didn't know.
That's a mouthful.
Yeah,
It's a lot.
run on.
It's at least a comma.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but if it makes sense to everybody else and it's good with Shipman and Goodwin, I know it's like a one-line policy, but it was unclear to me what that meant.
It all describes the student. So it's the student is a student who has a disability. A student with a disability eligible for special education and services under the IDEA. That's sort of the noun.
Right. Shall participate in. So I figured that part out, and then I got to shall participate in alternative assessments. I got that part, but then to particular statewide or district-wide assessments, I didn't know what.
An alternative to the statewide and district-wide assessments.
An alternative assessment, particular or statewide assessments. Okay, I think I understand. Okay, I get it now.
And then ultimately where it says shall be made, that's modifying decision, which is the first word 700 words earlier.
Yes, okay.
Decision shall be made.
I did read it multiple times and kept thinking, there's got to be a word missing here, but thank you.
It is confusing. It's not well written.
Somewhere there's
you can clear my
junior associate crying themselves to sleep.
I guarantee you that sentence will read cleaner to you and more simple to you if you go and look at 34 CFR 300.320, which I'm going to guess is more complicated than that.
And then I'll be relieved.
Yeah, right. Thank you for clarifying it. Right. Okay. Good. Show me some other one.
We do sunscreen.
Oh, I really want to do sunscreen. Where is it?
Up above.
Oh,
Sunscreen. Kathy had a question about
applications.
why it applies to only
Okay.
6-year-olds, because the statute only applies to 6-year-olds.
Right.
So
Kindergartners can't put on their own sunscreen.
Yeah, it's a specific statute that says only when you're 6 are you eligible to put on sunscreen. And I'm not joking.
No, I'm sure you're not, but I thought back to field day where kindergartners they're told, please bring sun lotion to school and then apply it.
Yep.
And so is this a problem? And do we need this at all? And then when it says the student's parent or guardian must sign the board's written authorization and submit the authorization to the school nurse, do we want to do that?
I think we already do that, and I think that it is part of the statutory application.
Yeah, if we're not doing that, we need to be.
So as far as I know, I have never signed a written authorization around sunscreen.
As far as I know, I've never been told to send my kid with sunscreen. I've been told to send my kid wearing sunscreen. And
I was actually going to say that I have never sent my kid with sunscreen, but I've always had to apply it before they get on the bus.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that is true. I've never sent them with a bottle of sun lotion.
Okay. We're good. We can clear these.
Yes. This is required?
I think by statute.
I mean, it gets into that gray area of there's a statute, so is there a policy required? This is in the cleaner bucket than some of the other ones we talked about.
Okay.
Relative. Okay.
It's a sliding scale.
Sunscreen. Done. Anyone have any other favorites they want to hit? Parental access to instructional materials. No comments on this one. I think we're done.
Nice and succinct.
Parent-teacher communication. That's a 4-pager. I didn't find this one to be terribly.
We have a policy on this that I remember reading recently because something came up about this, and there being sort of a requirement in one or more of the policies. I think Barlow has a policy on parent-teacher communication that requires parent-teacher conferences right now, which don't exist. And I think all the policies say we have 2 conferences a year and all this other fun stuff that doesn't exist in practice. And that was something that has just sort of been on my mind about a marriage of policy and operation.
Yeah. I've also been curious about that and wonder where it is here. In the legal reference. Do we have so Commissioner of Education, that's for the, I think the Commissioner of Education is for the State Board of Ed, or Department of Education, rather.
Right.
Yeah.
You can clear that one, John.
The hotlines one or the Commissioner?
The Commissioner one. The hotlines is in fact a typo, but
yeah, we can leave the typo. I like the typo lines left in here because I'm going to share this with Shipman and get them to clean up all those typos.
Because
they're hot. That's
an actual hot line.
I mean, what I don't like is adopting a policy that says that there'll be procedures that may include this and may include that. There's not going to be a homework hotline for parents to call up. There's no 800, 523 Barlow. Like, it doesn't exist. And so I don't know why we would start giving suggestions like this.
Also, like, really, somebody's going to call, like, there's maybe technology has advanced since 2021. So I think this requires a check-in with the administration and an understanding of how to Kathy's questions, how is this happening at HKMS?
Yeah, and what's one parent-teacher conference and 2 flexible parent-teacher conferences?
Right.
And when you have 6 teachers, do you how does that work? You just pick 2? Does a meeting with the guidance counselor count as a parent-teacher conference? I,
Right. It becomes like a homeroom question, maybe, or something like that, or yeah.
And I am curious about this requirement as of January 1st, 2022. That the parent-teacher conferences also require a document.
Right. Wasn't there another
sat through a parent-teacher conference 2 weeks ago and not received such a document?
Right. And this guy right here, the teacher needs to report inability.
Right.
Yeah.
And the Department of Education, the State Department of Education is developing this form. So is it developed?
That's not uncommon,
anybody's
by the
choice.
way. We've seen that before, where you get the form after we're supposed to have implemented the policy.
Well, I guess it is open-ended in that it says on or after January 1st. So that could be in 12 years.
Yeah, all of that is after.
Yeah, it doesn't say commencing on. It says
There are
at
so
some
many,
point in the very distant future.
Let's actually take turns naming dates that are after that. Okay.
This is one I sort of want to talk to the administration about, as well as look at the statutory obligations, because there's also collective bargaining implications to all of it, because there's school schedule implications to all of this.
Right. I think we'll tag it as revise because we think we need to talk.
Yeah.
Does that work? Okay. District computers. Let's do one 8-pager. I actually don't think this one is too bad. Appropriate online behavior. They do this in. Where do they do this?
Probably in one of the. I think at Barlow they cover that in wellness classes.
Yeah, but they actually start doing it at the elementary level.
Yeah. Middle school, I think for sure.
Yeah. But I don't know.
I couldn't recall, honestly. I was like, I know they talk about it with parents at parent-teacher conference back when we used to have those, but I was like, I don't know when they do this.
It comes up in SEL lessons like Second Step and PBIS, I think.
Okay. All right, you can uncheck. That's fine. Yeah.
I think in Samuel Staples, they used to do it when the kids went to the media center.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. There you go. That sounds right. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I certainly don't know if it's in the statute.
Yeah, I'm wondering where that got pulled from, because I'm just concerned about somebody marching into somebody's office with something that the kid found at school that they consider to be obscene, that creates a whole question about the integrity of the policy, filtering internet access, all of this stuff.
I mean, yeah, I think obviously obscene depictions of adult imagery, all that stuff, but the painting, a Da Vinci painting or something,
right, feeding a baby, but it's
exactly
turns out it's breastfeeding. Yeah,
right, and it's
that's why I wonder about whether or not, instead of trying to describe what the internet filtration does, simply say that it will exist. And then that removes from debate whether something is or isn't obscene or obscene as to minors in the eye of the beholder.
Additionally, the board will implement a technology protection measure
That's so
Terrible.
I mean, it seems like it should say something to the, like, best efforts or
Mhm.
something along those lines.
Additionally, the board will employ internet filtering technologies, period. Like, we don't need to get into all of this.
correct.
Yeah.
That's just where it just strikes me as a debate waiting to happen over a side issue.
Yeah. So how do we treat this? Do we say this is not so offensive that we can't advance this, or do we say we reject this and keep whatever we have?
I would say, dear Shipman, can we remove the back half of this sentence without an issue? Or is there some statutory cross-reference that we didn't dig up that says that you need to block obscene content, in which case we're just adopting that word for the purpose of complying with the statute? And then we just move on. I do take issue with the last sentence as I think trying to box itself into a different statute. I think you take out the entire preface. Because we're not the owner of the computer systems as defined above.
Yeah, I don't even know why we say that.
Right, because somebody who wrote this has no idea what it means to own a computer system. Like, at best, we're leasing stuff, but typically we're licensing or just passive visitors.
So you're suggesting remove the first clause as the owner of the computer systems, just capital T, the.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, that works.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, good. Suicide prevention and intervention.
I feel like this is one where we want to talk about the website links, but maybe I'm thinking of a different one. Nope.
I thought this one was thorough. I thought it was well done. And feels like there's a very close relationship between the amount of comments we put and the quality of the.
This is just one where we got to identify the the titles for different things, and that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Transportation seems like one that could cause a lot of agita.
No comments though.
Oh.
What?
Yeah, I think that was the one that I stopped on today.
Okay.
That's the state commissioner.
Chris, do you know? Is within 30 days of the end of the school year, the superintendent of schools or designee shall provide the commissioner of vehicles. That's a state level.
That's a state office, yeah.
All right, thanks.
I think it's not controversial, Chris, because it's statute.
Well, this is one where there's sort of a statutory piece of it, and then there's a discretionary piece of it. Like,
this, for instance,
the distances, particularly in our towns. I don't think there are very few places in our towns where you'd want a 15-year-old walking 2 miles in the morning for a bus necessarily.
Yeah.
Which isn't to say that that's where the buses are going to be scheduled for. In addition, I just want to be conscious of how
Yeah, and this one is, I mean, kindergartners, at least in Easton, kindergartners don't walk.
anywhere.
They get picked up at the end of the driveway.
I felt like there was a lot of information in here that does not apply to Easton, at least.
Yeah.
But it, it applies to most places probably.
Yeah, I think I could have, yeah, I think that's right. And I could imagine this one it's not a poorly written, it's just our existing policies are doing fine on the bus side.
I do wonder whether, so this talks about, I mean, really it's talking about to and from, so the definition of school transportation, procedure program implemented by which a pupil is transported to and from the school, the pupil's residence, the assigned public expense, blah, 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 blah. It doesn't, so a pupil is any individual of school age enrolled in a public or nonprofit private school within the district or contiguous school district, as the case may be. When it's saying the school district or contiguous school district, what's the difference between a school district and contiguous school district? Because this is obligating us to provide transportation to private schools which is already a statutory obligation within the school, within the town, or the districts, or Region 9, both towns.
Yeah, I don't know what that means in this context.
That's what I'm confused as to what the distinction is between the district and the contiguous district. And I'm also concerned about what an individual of school age enrolled in public or private school is. School age is not defined, and is school age 3, is school age 4, is school age 5, 6, 18, 19, 20, 21.
And that's a known quantity, but it's also it needs to be spelled out here.
If we have 10 definitions here, why isn't that one of them?
Right.
Well, and to that point, is there transportation provided for, preschool to Samuel Staples?
Right.
That's really the
And-
underbelly of my question.
And for the kids and for the students that now go to age 22, for example, are those students included here?
I assume without knowing that special education transportation is outside of this and is covered elsewhere, because it doesn't talk about this at all.
Right.
This talks about sort of regular transportation, which is typically not going to include those kids up to 22. But a contiguous school district to me would say that if Easton touches Fairfield, Easton is Region 9 is paying to drive kids to Fairfield Prep.
I think
that's what contiguous school district would sound like to me.
Yeah, contiguous is a very strange word to use there when there are sort of easy to understand other words you could use that are much more specific. I am suggesting that we're going to choose to reject this.
I would ask Shipman what they mean by this. I think that what they might mean is another school district within the same town that shares the same borders. I don't think they're using contiguous to mean contiguous here, because now somebody in Reading, but we're now busing to Danbury and Ridgefield and Wilton and Weston.
Strange. But that's not the only issue with this, right? Even if that wasn't an issue, I think there are like the issue with the distance, the sort of policies of who's walking where. I think this is a controversial one that could create a lot of noise, but also could, if we don't do this right, it could create expenses for us.
Right. I want to be conscious of that. I want to be conscious of making sure that we're defining this as regular transportation for the K-12 population, basically.
My proposal would be that we reject this. This goes into the bigger bucket of policies that
things that need work.
Things that need work.
I agree with that. I mean, the Region 9, the current policy for transportation, there are several, but the overall one is the Board of Education will provide transportation for students under provisions of state law and regulations.
Right.
Transportation by private carrier may be provided whenever such practice is more economical than using school district-owned vehicles. Parents may be reimbursed for transportation of eligible students whenever such practice is more economical or convenient for the district. Prior approval must be obtained through the superintendent or designee. And then there's a federal compliance. There's a few paragraphs on federal compliance, and that's the policy. Then there are separate policies around behavior, equipment, that sort of thing, but that's the overall policy, which is very straightforward. We'll comply with provisions of state law and regulations, and then federal compliance.
Okay. Are we good to move on to, we hit a couple of quick wins if we can. Weighted grading. Come on, weighted grading.
Oh, that one may not be a quick win. So the reason why I say, but I think it's fair to raise, I would punt this to the administration.
Okay.
And the reason why is because the Region 9 board, probably from like 2.5, 3 years ago, and the administration at the time, the administration recommended a change to weighted grading. And ultimately it was a split decision by the board. So we didn't change anything. And so, but it's fairly arbitrary the way the weighted grading is. In other words, everything that's below a C is not weighted. If you take an honors or AP class and it's above a C plus, you get the weight. If it's not, you get nothing. And so it's kind of, and that led to a whole debate that it's somewhat arbitrary. We surveyed other districts in Durgay, et cetera, et cetera. So, and this is kind of, I think that, this is only unique to Barlow. So, we can certainly table this to Region 9.
Okay.
Yeah.
Happy to.
I think RES should really start having some weighted grading.
But we can be way more arbitrary. If you've been a kid, come on.
Our kids are too stressed out. We don't want to make them stressed out when they're in K through 8.
Ours is going to be.
Our letter grades are already OC, R, and F. So it's.
Ours are just going to randomize. Okay. Did that one already.
Promotion and retention above it.
Sure. I see no notes. Good.
This one was straightforward, nice and easy.
Done.
The superintendent shall follow the statute. That's what it says.
Crazy. Parent and family engagement for Title I students. Very good point, Kathy. Very good point, Kathy. I read this whole thing and I could have stopped at the very top. Say, I'm sorry, I can't. Because this has to be developed jointly and agreed upon by parents and family members of children participating in Title I. So that one goes right to, we looked at it. We're not exactly approving it at this point. I think we have to say revise because it has to be worked on with them. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Send to administration to figure out.
Yeah. Okay. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more.
Go for it.
Yeah. Private technologies. Typo. Recommendation to include the optional language. Everyone agree with that?
Mhm.
Typo. Done. Wellness.
So just I'm looking at the private technology for the first time. Privately owned tech devices may not be used during instruction time unless necessary for a student to access the digital learning platform or otherwise engage in remote learning.
It's not art, but it's fine. Don't use your personal device unless you're supposed to be using your personal device.
What's the district's digital learning platform? If I'm using my laptop at Barlow to research something for a paper, I'm not accessing the digital learning platform or engaging in remote learning.
If you're writing the paper in Google Docs,
Right.
What if I'm not writing in that moment? What if I'm just
Googling? Writing is the process of thinking, right? Writing is the process of both the draft, revision, and research. So I'd say all of that is writing. I think we're good.
Isn't or otherwise engage in remote learning.
But you're not learning remotely. You're sitting in the building.
Well, I read that.
Remote is not remote. I'm not in the building. You know what I mean? Remote could be, I don't know. Well, I take your point, Crystal.
When I read that, to your point, where it said permitted by instructional staff, I thought, okay, well, they said I can use my laptop to do research in the library.
Right.
Or they said I could be on my laptop during this. Now, if you're doing something you shouldn't be doing on your laptop, that's different. But that's how I read it. That if your teacher was allowing you to use your personal device.
And they do that.
Or the staff was, that it was okay.
Yep. I think we're covered by that line.
What does the next sentence mean then? On school property at a school-sponsored activity while in use for a remote learning activity or while being used to access the technology of the board, the use of any such device is for an improper purpose. Okay, sorry.
Yep. Don't do any of this bad stuff. Yeah. Wellness.
I mean, this is our wellness committee, correct?
Yeah.
That we don't call it the advisory council, but that's the same function, would it not be?
I'm not clear about that. I don't know I know that, so the wellness committee has certain specific requirements from state statute. I don't know if this is capturing all of them or some of them. Is there something else related to wellness committee? I don't know. I saw like there's so much here.
I'm getting deja vu with these. Like I feel like we read a policy that said basically this weeks ago.
Yeah.
Well, it starts to seem a little bit like the plans that are supposed to be put in place per policy.
Right. Yeah, like we're getting into some regs here. And especially here where these should be sort of reviewed on an ongoing basis. And like I just, it seems like a lot to bake into policy. It doesn't seem like the right place for it.
Well, and if our wellness committee does not equal an advisory council on wellness, then we have to do that.
Right. There's a new organization that has to be formed. I think we have questions on this at a minimum.
Yeah.
And I think that the sort of time sort of sensitive part of this is for Sarah and I to be able to create a summary document of items we are looking for guidance on from Shipman.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we need guidance from Shipman on this. So I would say we tag this, and then we can determine at a later date whether or not we're rejecting or not. But we looked at it, and I think we're saying we clearly need some advice from Shipman on this. Credit for online courses. This one I thought was pretty straightforward, but we'll see. Right. Yeah, this is a whole thing. I agree.
I don't love codifying COVID-19 in policy.
Yeah.
That seems to hopefully date it real fast, but
I mean, I think it's great personally, but you know, and then I just see we have to think about how it would impact collective bargaining agreements.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I was thinking about right now, Barlow offers a whole independent study online. They have a whole group of options that students can take advantage of. And how would this policy affect those options? And they do currently have in place, you know, right now, if it's a course Barlow offers, I don't believe will give you credit toward graduation, even if it meets all these requirements, for example. So I think it needs to be reviewed in the context of what Barlow's currently doing.
Yeah, and I remember in this one, it does say that it's only 9th through 12th graders, and I was curious as to whether or not that was specific, that it was dictating that simply because that's in the statute, or if this would allow for an 8th grader or, you know, a 7th grader, you know, to explore some of those options as well, because there's some really good stuff out there.
There's great stuff. And for example, you take something over the summer, then could you get credit for that? Though I don't know then if this is a policy versus a regulation around course credits and what schools will accept or not.
Yeah, it feels like it's more a function of the sort of this guy that we may need to include it because of the option of some of this distance learning, remote learning stuff that's starting to emerge. So it feels like the question here is maybe less for Shipman, maybe more for administration.
Yeah.
Do we agree with that? That we have questions here, but I don't know that I mean, unless somebody thinks, no, we got to flag this for Shipman. But I think at a minimum, we're saying we need to ask.
Yes, I think it's more our questions before we would go to Shipman.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's right.
And just to be, I looked up section 391 of Public Act 21-2, and it specifically relates to 9th to 12th grade.
Yeah.
As you might expect, but that's.
But it doesn't exclude it, Chris, right?
For the year commencing July 1, 2022, and each school year thereafter, a local or regional board of education may authorize remote learning to students in grades 9 through 12 inclusive, provided such board provides such instruction in compliance with the standards developed pursuant to subsection B, yada, yada, yada.
Go ahead, exclude 8th graders. All right, so we have 2 more. Curricular exemptions. Kathy, what do you mean by notification of intended curriculum required? Oh, you're on mute.
Oops, I'm sorry. It's written request for mandatory exemption, but how would you know to request an exemption? Is there a notification that we're going to talk about a biology, a dissection, any of the other topics?
Right. That's a good question.
This just it seemed extremely dated to me.
Okay.
So I just wanted to be sure that, maybe the existing statutes are specify 1 through 4, but I just thought they were very pointed, very dated to some degree. I mean, HIV/AIDS. I mean,
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think some of this curriculum is sort of been created and been incorporated for years.
Yeah.
And the degree to which it may or may not have been updated or I think, Kathy, this is a really good question, and it seems like it's a sort of obvious miss.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because especially when you're thinking, when do they get their class list or their, so then when is the teacher, are they sending them a notification over the summer when those lists are then published?
Right. Yeah, I think it's
we're going to cover these topics.
I'm familiar with sort of the, hey, next month we're going to cover this. Here's the form to fill out if you don't want to hear about this.
Right. Which that seems very reasonable. And if that's the current practice, great. But this policy says 2 weeks, the beginning of the year, which may just not fit with the way that teachers have been teaching the subjects for decades. So I'm
just looking at one of the statutory references on dissection, and it's very short and to the point. A school district shall excuse any student from participating in or observing the dissection of any animal as part of a classroom instruction, provided the parent or guardian has requested in writing such an excuse. Any student excused shall be required to complete an alternate assignment.
Yeah. I mean, that's almost exactly what's in the policy.
Right.
Yep. Any student excused from participating or observing the dissection of any animal as part of a classroom instruction shall be required to complete an alternate assignment to be determined by the teacher.
Which will not include push-ups.
That's right, because this other policy, let's cross-reference that for sure. Although, how else are we going to get buff? All right. We have one more. I think that's right. Yes?
Yes.
Curricular exemptions. Limited exemptions to in-person attendance.
This we just pass on. This is only good for this year.
Yeah. We can wait them out.
Right. But we'll adopt it on June 1st for 2 weeks.
Sounds right. Yeah. Correct.
Yeah.
Good. Okay.
It's a procedure too. It's listed as an administrative procedure, not a policy.
Right. Okay. Thank you. All right then. So Sarah and I will figure out a way to summarize all these. I did want to do can I do a count if statement for this range and say, tell me if it is it going to be true is the value? Let's pretend that it's going to say it's true. 32. So we have 32 items where we've said flag. Some of those are really simple questions, and some of those are more in-depth conversations. So Sarah and I will be in contact, and we'll figure out a way to sort of summarize this so that we can dig in on Friday morning, and that first with just us, and then with our partners from Shipman. Good.
Thank you both for pulling together the list, because that's extra. That's that's not a simple task. So thank you.
Read.
It'll be fun. All right. So let's bear with me, just stop the share and go to our agenda. I think that takes us to committee member comment.
I just have to say, everybody did a great job. You really powered through all these in a short amount of time. So
Yeah, really good stuff. Good. No further comment. I'll look for a motion to adjourn. Good.
So moved.
Unanimously adjourned for the Joint Policy Committee at 10:43 p.m.
I'll move to adjourn the Region 9 Policy Committee meeting at 10:43 p.m. as well. All right.
Good.
Good night, all. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
bye.
Good night,
Talk to you soon,
everybody.
John.